And then we definitely like to flirt with nature, right? We reference nature in such witty ways, and this is such a commentary on our relationship with nature. And there's so much of this that's out there. And you know, we constantly try to evoke nature. These are sandals made of grass, and you know, it's so evocative in what we do. But look at the one on the left, and let's look at the, you know, put on the lens of whether it has design integrity or not, and compare it to something from 6th millennium BC, right? This is a rope sandal, also made of grass, and just look at the design integrity of this sandal, right? I don't think I'm going to go back again, right? We haven't progressed quite as much as we think. Like I would have picked this one, right? I think, you know, and then we definitely question choices, right? We are constantly, we have molded ourselves into this way of being, and we find ourselves doing all these strange things, like sitting in a room like this with, you know, so many chairs, and I drove to work today, and it just seems very normal. But let's step outside of that and ask ourselves, you know, what are we about? And while we make those choices, and we're concerned about where it's getting us, there are all these new things that are being done to basically modify or give us other options. And then we're trying to be concerned about how much waste we create. These are diapers that have got the seal of cradle to cradle certification, which means that it's taken into account where it comes from and how it dies. And yet, every time a diaper change takes place, that thing is landing somewhere, right? The big story with this one is that it's being flushed down the toilet as opposed to finding its way into the garbage dump. And I looked into the material properties, and even within those materials are things that are more biodegradable than others, but only within limits. And that's the point I'm going to keep making, and I'll see this. And this is of course design making really, really strong arguments. And this is a demo house that was built out of purely recycled materials in a very short period of time, and with a lot of volunteer help in San Francisco. It raises a really big question about what we do with all the materials in our houses. And then we go about with our knowledge of materials and for very, very aggressive alternatives. Right? This is, some of these wind machines, the wingspans, the spans, get to be longer than a football field. Right? It's with our knowledge of composites and fiberglass technology and so on. Like, look at the one of the rotors of this. It's just like fantastic. And just by bringing about a new kind of materials, and this is such a small selection of what's going on in the material world, because in so many ways, material science is a field that has just exploded in this last century. And this is one of the fallouts. This is photovoltaic panels, and it's being used in ways that is starting to modify the architecture, B, somehow work within existing norms as well of architecture. It doesn't look so outlandish either, but it's extremely novel in what it does. It's generating electricity. Just imagine that. It is actually amazing when you stop to think about it. And while we are doing this, let's look back a little to how communities that created architectures like this. Let's look beyond the architecture and ask, what must the rules of a society like this be? What are the underlying principles of people who create design like this that has such high design integrity? And is there anything for us now in the way we design? And some more of that. And when you look at this, we don't know, we might not know what it's like to live in homes like this. But actually I do, because I've worked for a few years in rural India building adobe houses. And earth is an absolutely stupendous material. It works on you in a way that's just amazing. It's very hard for me to express what the other underlying layers in something like this. Not that I'm suggesting that we build an entire civilization around this specific architecture, but within this, to the point that was made earlier, if this has a song to sing, or if this has a voice, what is it telling us? And this is just an instance of a piece of architecture, not something that is scalable, not something that one can necessarily see an entire city and entire people adopting to, but it's asking a very important question. It's essentially asking a question that convention and to some extent mediocrity has obscured, which is, there is a value in the land, an ecological value in the land, before we do anything to it. And is it necessary to take all of it away, or is there a way in which to keep it intact and sometimes enhance it? And so if you look at design like this, this is also design. Where is the designer, and where are the boundary conditions between what was the design and what was the backdrop? Where does it begin and where does it end? And this is hugely inspirational for me in terms of design, thinking of larger principles. So how are other ways in which we use materials? This is how we use materials. On the left, this is the other side of the balance sheet of the equation. On the left is an open cast mine. It's a copper mine. Every piece of the things that we see around us, this computer here, this aluminum out here, these lights out here, has another story. That's the other side of the balance sheet. Somehow we don't see as much of it. And on the right are objects that are so familiar to us, we don't think about it when we're on a freeway all around us. Thank you. And that's another view of what we do. And so we seem to have a predilection of taking land that looks like this and turning into the one on the right, which is not necessarily a problem. It is a problem when you are given a certain kind of scale. And that's the kind of thing we get. This is the polar ice cap having melted by 20% in a span of 2 years between 2005 and 2007. This is bigger news than if I heard that Earth was colonized by aliens, because maybe those guys are friendly. There's nothing about this that, it seems to have an upside.